I want to talk about what makes a story great, and by extension, the author. And of course, it's not popularity and it's not good writing, but rather it is accolades or impact. And so first I want to talk about why it's not the aforementioned two. When it comes to popularity, the simple fact of the matter is that a show or a story can be popular for a season, it can be popular for its era, and that's a good thing, but soon enough it kind of fizzles away. That popularity fizzles away when the era is done. When the story is done, it fizzles away. It might take 10 years, 20 years until the story disappears from the collective conscious, but in the end it will disappear, and it will turn into one of the many stories that have existed before in the world that were once popular. And you can have many, and we have rather many examples of such stories in the past, whether it's books, novels, manga, or comics. Popularity is something that unfortunately fades away. And if we were to go to good writing is even worse than popularity in this light, where many times what can happen is that a story can have good use of story techniques like world building, foreshadowing, and all that stuff that usual people talk about when they're talking about good writing, like having a very tight narrative where everything makes sense. You have basically no contradictions. That would be like the perfect story essentially, or rather the perfectly written story. It could exist, and the reason why it's even worse than popularity is because people can just never know about it. Even the target audience could just never know about that story, about the depth of its apparent greatness when it comes to writing. And so when you have a well-written story that the target audience has never seen, or only a few has seen, or only a few were willing to see it, even worse so, then it just has the same value as a confession letter that was never sent to its intended target, where everything is mired in what ifs, like, oh yes, I could have gotten the girl, I could have gotten the guy if I'd sent the letter. If only I'd sent that letter, then maybe, I would have been with them. I would be walking down the aisle, I'd be standing, ready to receive her hand in marriage. It's all pointless and delusional at that point. And even a combination of the two, where it's good writing and popularity, isn't good enough to be considered a great story. Because what makes a great story is not so easily defined in such a almost calculated 1, 2, 3 step process. I just want to make one more example that hopefully can encapsulate my previous two reasons as to why popularity and good writing does not make a great story. Think of it like in war terms, or historical war terms, where for popularity you have Rommel, I think his name was. He was a German general, and apparently he was great at his job in World War I or II. But just as many other generals and leaders in the war, in different wars, they are not as well known as, for example, Genghis Khan, and that segues into the popularity aspect. I apologize if I said popularity previously. I meant good writing. As an example, Rommel will be an example of good writing in relation to being a good military strategist and leader. But what we see is that in spite of that, Genghis Khan is more well known, not only in terms of popularity, but impact. And yet he was not a good general, a good leader, war leader. He was, from what I've seen through like historical research, he was very lucky, if you could say that. And yet what puts him at the top is what he was able to accomplish, the accolades, the impact of what he did. And so Rommel will be forgotten in history eventually, and already has been, as even most military YouTubers, they don't really talk about him. And he's not used as some kind of comparison that keeps being brought up. Like an example would be in the scientific field, Einstein, where we do have a lot of other scientists that exist in the world that have become popular because they've discovered their own stuff, but none of them have had the same impact as Einstein. And that is not solely because of what Einstein has done, but it is also how people have treated Einstein, putting him in conversation and using him in a way to say that someone is smart. And the same could be said for stories, where we have examples like The Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, A Song of Ice and Fire, and even if it's sci-fi, I would say Star Wars, where all of these works aren't actually the best in their field. I'm sure anyone could probably find, given some time, some story that was released at the same time, in the same era, that is probably better written or was neck and neck in popularity with another franchise, maybe for example like the Star Wars and Star Trek. And so what you see with these stories is that it might not even be the story itself that did something new, but it could be the execution of the presentation of that story, which is an example for Star Wars again, where there were a lot of new things that were brought into the big screen. And in a general sense, if we are honest and we say that there is no such thing as an original idea, then we would also have to admit that when we're looking at these different stories, the Lord of the Rings and Song of Ice and Fire, they're not really doing anything new. That none of these stories that I just mentioned have done anything that is actually new or added something new to the fantasy genre. What they have done is add something new to the public eye, and that has left such an impact on the public that it really doesn't matter who was first for a certain idea, not truly, but it was who brought it to the public eye. And I think that's the beauty of a great story in that sense, because it isn't one aspect that made it good. It isn't just two aspects combined together that also made it good, but it was many different conditions that had to be met that were both in the control and out of control of the original author or team that was working on said story, where even the audience itself takes part in this. Even time itself takes part in this. If we're going to make an example of Demon Slayer, where Demon Slayer was able to outsell One Piece, and Jujutsu Kaisen was able to become a massive story as well in terms of popularity. And this is majorly so because of the COVID pandemic and being created in the digital era. And then when you think about Dragon Ball, all the elements that it added to an entire genre of shonen that have stayed and still work, and you have authors in the same magazine and also outside of it keep on adding, twisting details to it, never truly disrespecting that original idea, but using it in their own ways, incorporating all these ideas into their own stories, has been amazing to see. And then you have the big three. I remember watching a video on, it was a YouTuber who made a video on the fact that there is no real reason why the big three is essentially called the big three. You know, he was going into detail of this, and I said this is even better than if there was a reason. And this is what I'm talking about when I say great stories, is because this was elevated by the audience itself, just for the sake of the era at the time that they were coming out, and the impact that they had on these individuals, that they inevitably were put into this category of the big three. And while they all had their own impact in storytelling and the wider world of storytelling, and have been big contributors to inspiring the next generation of stories that would have their own level of impact, it is still amazing to think about the fact that they got that title just by their mere existence at a certain point in time, and how they affected different audiences across the world. And in that way, they will always be known as the big three. And as I've said before, it doesn't matter if the stories were well written, it doesn't matter how popular the stories were. All of that in the end doesn't matter under the weight of impact. And the reason why I personally think so is because when you read enough stories, you know, they all kind of meld together, not necessarily because the ideas are planned or anything like that, but you truly start to feel that concept that there's no such thing as something original. So you will find yourself in a place where you gain love and appreciation. Hopefully you actually find yourself in that place, but you're getting love and appreciation of these connections in different stories, where you see an element in a story and a certain arc, a certain story beat, the way the theme is handled, that you have seen in another story, and it shows you how connected humans are rather than how different we are. We're more alike than we are different. And these are like stories from across the world. These themes and writing strategies are similar to each other, and yet these authors have never met each other. These cultures might not have interacted with each other for long periods of time. And so I just genuinely find that aspect incredible. And so for me, in that sense, if a story is being told to me like, oh, it's well written, it's not really a plus in my mind. I would say in relation to like the average person, it's the same thing as saying that this is the most popular story out right now and everyone's watching it, so therefore it's good and therefore you should watch it. Like, it doesn't really mean anything to me. And what it feels like is that it also doesn't really mean anything in reality as well, because in the end, those stories, either well written or very popular, are not the ones that end up leaving an impact in the world and on the landscape of storytelling. Just like when we read stories like Berserk, the manga Berserk, and Vinland Saga and Vagabond, where there are tons of stories about redemption, there are tons of stories about self-realization that are out because of the impact that they have made and the other great stories that they have inspired. And so someone cannot strive for a story to become great. It's something that just happens truly in a human way. It's very organic. It's the one thing that cannot be manufactured. You can't manufacture greatness, especially when it comes to storytelling. There are too many factors that are outside of your own control, and that's what makes it beautiful. So while there are stories that I also want to get love and popularity, but more importantly reach greatness status, like Lord of the Mysteries, but I do know that this type of thing is hit or miss. It's about timing. It's about so many factors that you have no control over. And so no matter how great or well written you think a story is, or how popular you think it would become, how attractive you make the characters, how complex you make the characters, none of that matters if it actually doesn't have a strong impact. And I'm not talking about like like in regards to Lord of the Mysteries. Like the impact, it's already there because there's only, rather than only, I'm saying that there's impact in the sense that it's a web novel and it is already considered good, but that's mostly in China. I'm talking about global impact. But with that being said, I need to end this video. I think I'm just rambling now. But yes, I want to know, what franchises do you think have undeniable impact or have done something massive for stories and across the world? Because I know there's a lot of stories that I didn't name here, like Akira was so great for animation. It doesn't really matter about writing or any of that stuff. It's mostly about the impact. So I want to know, what are your answers on that? And I'd also like to hear your own perspective on this, because although I really do think I'm irrefutably correct about impact being more important than anything else really, I am open to hearing about, like, if somebody can make a good argument for good writing and popularity or other factors that I didn't name here. But with that, I'll see you next time.